Hey everyone, Dr. Frunkey here with a really exciting new knife consult for you on a new knife from a new knife maker. This is the first time that I have seen anyone do a video about Edgar Cole custom knives, and this is the first that I've ever seen of their knives. Now, Edgar Cole Custom Knives is made up of two individuals, Gabe Anderson and Robert Riley. They are based out of Arizona in the US of A. And these guys have a background in engineering and design. They have backgrounds in aerospace engineering, race car engineering, CAD design, and material science. All of these things make for a very exciting sort of potential for an excellent knife maker. And this is going to be their model Chimera. This is number 228. What I'm sort of blown away by is that they've made 228 of these, and they're going relatively unnoticed in the custom knife world. I happened to cross this sale simply by luck of the Instagram search feature. They were publishing some pictures of some of their recent builds, and it just happened to scroll across my screen. And I gave them a follow, and they were doing a lottery to buy a few of the knives, and I just entered, and I was lucky enough to win number 228. I didn't win it free. I paid for this of my own money, so please understand what we're looking at here. I paid for this outright. This is my knife, 100%, so that should take away any bias. The blade material on this one is going to be XHP. They heat treat their own steel. This one is at 61.5 because that's right where they like to have it. The handle is 6AL 4V titanium. With this one has their Type 3 milling pattern running on phosphor bronze washers. This is critical right here. That's very important to the entire ethos of the knife right there. Assembled in February of 2019. They say the lock bar insert is non-removable. It's probably glued in there. So without much further ado, I'm going to go ahead and show you the knife. It comes in this nice box right here. These guys also make high-end, I believe it's titanium or aluminum custom knife boxes, and they sell those on their website. I'll leave a link to their site down below. But this is the Chimera. Now, a chimera is sort of a mythological creature that is an amalgamation of various different animals. It could have like a lion's head and a dog's body and unicorn wings. A creature that doesn't necessarily come from just one DNA lineage. It is a combination of things. And I think that that's very fitting for this knife because immediately there are some recognizable DNAs that have gone into this knife. Now, I'm not going to say anything about the fact that this is so similar to certain types of knives. And I'm going to say specifically Shirogorov and Southard knives. I've seen some of these design elements on some of those knives, and I immediately addressed that with these guys. And they said, we designed a knife to be purely functional. We designed it with the intention of a purely functional but also aesthetically pleasing design, and this is what they came up with. I need to explain to all of my viewers that blade design and handle design has been going on since the very beginning of humankind, since we were making blades. And so to have a sort of a thought that there is a copyright or any kind of a institution that would forbid you from creating a blade that looks anything like another knife is silly, because all knives look alike. There are very minor differences, but be that as it may, this has some very striking resemblances specifically to some Shirogorov knives. But I think that this knife defines itself as its own entity and is not so similar to be called a copy or a clone, or you maybe go into the homage type of category, but this is more of purely engineering focused design, and that's what Shirogorovs are to begin with. The reason that they're so popular, the reason I loved them, is that they're just built for a functional use, and they get rid of a lot of the frills, and this knife is no different. So let's go ahead and get some vital signs on this guy before we go too much further. As I mentioned, these guys are engineers, and so they create this design, they draw up the CAD, and they build it all in their own shop. Up front, you've got a 3.5-inch blade, about 7.8 inches of overall length. You're looking at about 4.3 inches of handle, with an effective grip area just under 4 inches. These handle scales, with the way that they're milled with this particular model, comes in with a 0.42 inch thickness, so under half an inch, and a blade stock of 156 thousandths. So a very standard blade stock with very thin handles. And I actually quite like that. It makes for a very strong knife that's also quite lightweight. I'll bring out another couple of knives for a good size comparison here. This is the Spyderco Paramilitary 2 and the Para 3. And if I line them all up like this, you can see that the Chimera fits nicely in between those two knives. I really like to see knives in the EDC range fall in between these two knives right here. Let me bring out another recent knife that we have here. This is an Adam Purvis progeny right here. This is his newest knife. I wanted to say thanks to my patrons for allowing me to pick that one up. Let me bring out another couple of high-end knives. For those of you considering these, this knife costs $750, and they kind of range from about $650 to about $1,000. So those of you who are capable of purchasing this knife, maybe you'll be familiar with these two, the Koenig knives Arius and the Brown knives Servo. So you can see this is a very functionally oriented knife. If I had a Shirogorov Hati or an F95, and then I had a Neon right here, it would probably fit in between those two. And that is an awesome thing, because I feel like the F95 is maybe too big and the Neon may be too small. So this may be, honestly, an American version of the most perfectly engineered knife. We're going to get into that. So, moving ahead, let's take a look at this blade. Again, this is done in CTS XHP. That is not necessarily important, because these guys will do pretty much any steel you want. As I mentioned before, they are material scientists and engineers, and they are deeply fascinated with the use and development of the different materials, including steels and handle materials. They have on-site XHP, 20CV, 204P, M390, AEBL. They have Damasteel. They have some Sanmai variants. These guys are willing to work with whatever you want. They heat treat on-site. They test on-site. The blades, as far as I understand, are maybe they're water jetted elsewhere, and then they are brought in for CNC and then for finishing. These guys grind them over there. This one is done with, I think they called it sort of a polished stonewash look, or I think they called it a semi-matte finish. It is sort of a bead blast followed by a stonewash. It is reminiscent of a Shirogorov finish, hence a lot of people have been saying this about this knife. That is not a unique finish. It is not the only knife in the world with that finish, and this one is not exactly the same. It's really a heavy stonewash on top of a bead blast. What it is a very user-friendly finish. It feels very slick to the touch. It is not in any way rough. Some of these finishes that could be acid washed or whatever might be a little bit rough. This is quite smooth, and it's ground very thinly. It's got a very nice plunge grind where you can see that it comes to a very fine amount of material there behind the edge. Perhaps you can see that there, and how that tapers down aggressively. And so you get a very, very slicey knife. And the edge came about as perfect as I've ever seen an edge come from anyone ever. Maybe they did this with a belt, I'm not sure, but the grains are all matching. The thickness is extremely consistent. It's sharpened perfectly all the way back to the heel of the blade without any real type of a smile. This came perfectly sharpened. Something that custom knives do not always have. Sometimes they're wedges. Sometimes they're not really meant to be knives, but this actually is designed and executed to be a perfect knife. There's a nice sharpening choil back here. I'm not sure how that will hold up over time, but it is present. There is no jimping or finish work, necessarily any new changes here on the top of the blade. It's all kept clean and simple. I like how the blade is rounded within the housing of the handle here. It tucks itself in nicely up here at the top, and then when the knife is open, it stays very subtle and hidden. It's just a very nice touch. Every bit of the blade has been touched and has been finished, and it all looks quite nice. Now let's move back and talk about the pivot. This is possibly the most compelling part of the entire experience. If the aesthetics and the functionality of the blade don't get you, the pivot most certainly will. This thing runs, as I mentioned before, on phosphor bronze washers. It runs like it's on bearings. I don't know that I have had a knife that has had quite this perfect of a phosphor bronze washer action. When combining that with a very crisp ceramic detent, which you can see here is a white ceramic ball, makes for a very enjoyable experience. Now, I am not going to be able to do this perfectly every time because washer actions will never equate to ball bearing actions. I cannot stand here and tell you that this is as perfectly smooth as a bearing knife. All bearing knives will probably end up being smoother than any washer knife. And I should qualify that word smoother by saying faster. All bearing knives are going to be faster because there just is that rotational allowance. It just is much smoother. The friction is still much less. What you look for in a phosphor bronze washer pivot is that perfect smoothness combined with speed. This one absolutely achieves it. However, this knife, with its phosphor bronze tuning, is going to be akin to the race cars that these gentlemen have worked on in the past. And what I mean by that is, if you take a Koenig Arius, it runs on bearings. This is a beautifully made knife, very well engineered, tight tolerances, very nicely made. I would equate this to a very high-end Ferrari. Call this a Ferrari LaFerrari, the top of the line, top. That car is designed for driving on the road. It has certain amenities and things that allow you to use it on the road, including an easy-to-use gearbox, a slightly more compliant suspension, and a sound system and an air conditioning unit. This knife is like a GT3 race car, a 458 GT3, a true thoroughbred race car. You're going to have to tune this knife to the track. And by that I mean you're going to have to tune this knife to where you live. My friend Eugene Kwan received one of these knives, one from the exact same lot where this one was built. And he, I don't think, had a pleasurable experience with the action, but I tried to tell him that it needs to be tuned very carefully. And that requires some very careful, many tiny motions in order to tune that pivot and Loctite it in the exact position that you want. And then allowing the washers to lubricate themselves and the detent track to develop itself over time. This is not a knife that right out of the box you're going to say that has the best action I've ever felt. You know, perhaps my Rob Carter and Frank Fisher Talon, out of the box, that action was unbelievable, insanely fast. But this one will take some time. It's much like picking up a paramilitary 2. A lot of para 2s are not perfect right out of the box, but give it a few weeks of doing some Spidey flicks, and this thing will fly open and close. Well, this one I haven't used in quite a number of days, but here, I'll show you my para 3. It's definitely smoother. It just flies all over the place. Now, this knife is not as smooth as the paras because the paramilitaries, you're going to notice, if you get them to that loose enough point, there's a little bit of blade play. There's absolutely no blade play with this. It's absolutely locked into the perfect tuning. I did have to take the pivot out. I did have to tune it a little bit, and now I've got it exactly where I want it. I do think even things like humidity and heat can cause some minor adjustments in that, and so be aware that this is a phosphor bronze washer knife, and it is not going to be like your ball bearing knives. And so a lot of people will rush into this and perhaps they'll be disappointed, but I think that you need to understand that there is a spectrum of knives out there. Take, for instance, this recently acquired Native 5. This thing is a lockback knife. It is not as fast as any of the knives you've seen on this video, but it is useful, it is strong, and it is reliable. And that is what washers are for. It is the most reliable sort of pivot, and that is what they wanted to have. They wanted to have a functional user pivot, and they certainly achieved that here. And it is one of the best actions I've ever felt. Look at the drop shut. Just very smooth, just almost effortless, just gentle shaking. and then it drops closed, and the detent sounds good. Now, if you put your finger accidentally on the lock bar, you can sometimes muffle the opening and you can get it stuck, but I did that on purpose. If you are careful to not put any pressure on there, or even just not a lot of pressure, if your finger is on it, it's no problem. It's just don't apply any pressure and it flies out like any other knife. That will happen on most knives. You do that to any ZT, the same thing is going to happen. So honestly, that's not a problem. I enjoy the detent because it is so crisp on both the opening and the closing. This thing is dead centered. Maybe it's maybe it's gone off since I'm playing with it here, but it is going to need some tuning there. It was perfectly on center at the beginning of this video. There is a steel lock bar insert going on right here. And it has this has been a point of contention for some people. This is an interesting sort of milling solution that they've had here, where they raised up that part of the lock bar and they used a button type screw. Aesthetically, this is maybe not the best choice for the long term, but I find it to be intriguing that they went to such lengths to have that raised up like that. The body gap is very small here. Maybe they used wire EDM, I'm not sure. Very tight. There is a milled 3D pocket clip that also features some unique milling right around the base. The smooth titanium, we'll go ahead and move back to the handles here. The smooth titanium has been milled with this seashell type pattern. I hesitate to call it that because that's the Shirogorov term, but it is very similar to that. And also the pivot hardware. This particular one, I'm going to say is a C to look like Edgar Cole, but let's not fool ourselves. It looks exactly like the Shirogorov pivot. And so what they have told me is that, they didn't intend for that to happen necessarily. They wanted to design a pivot that they liked. And it's not really their fault if we associate this design with Shirogorov because it's not necessarily patented. They didn't say exactly that, but I'm just saying that if we associate this pivot with Shirogorov, it's basically not their fault. What they did say is that they are happy to make any type of pivot design you want within reason. They are at a state in their knife-making career where they are still developing such things, and so perhaps they would be open to suggestions. This one features what they call a castellated pivot collar, also presumably titanium. This one is unfinished and polished. It features a raised titanium back spacer. I really like this. I think it looks so nice. And it's quite comfortable in the hand. It fills the hand a little bit more because of this distal taper here. Notice the construction technique where the screws go in on this side and then they affix to the handle on the other side. Some people like that, some people don't. I don't personally mind it. I think the Nick Shabazes of the world will complain that that's not quite as strong as a cylinder that goes through, but I don't anticipate ever putting this knife into such a situation that a steel screw would strip out of a titanium frame. And so, if it is in that situation and it fails, I'm probably going to be dead anyways because of how much force that would require. Taking a look right here again. Yeah, I guess it is off center right now. That's my fault. I probably loosened the pivot because I've carried it the last couple of days and flicked it about 10,000 times. In any case, what you can see is that this knife is very tight. It's very smooth. It's very fast. It is just the right size. The ergonomics are excellent because it's a very simple shape. It's just a very straight shape right here, and just a very usable knife. I didn't show you guys how light this knife is. With all of this milling going on, it comes in at 3.26 ounces, which is under the 1-to-1 ratio of 3.5 inches to 3.2 ounces, and so it is a very light knife for what it is, and they achieve that by also doing internal milling. Maybe that will come through in the video when you guys see this on your screens. So, what do I think of this knife? Well, I am a huge fan. I like it so much that I ordered one. I have put in a custom order with very specific requests with the guys over there, and we are going to be building it. I honestly wanted to wait before I released this video so that I would not hype them up so much that I would not be able to buy a custom knife of my own. This one was a maker's choice knife. Now, these guys are still early in their knife making career. I'm not sure how long it's going to take them to make a knife if you order it. I believe that it's only a couple of months from the time of ordering to the time of it being done at this point. But that may change after I release this video. I just want to address the people that think that this knife is a clone or a copy. This knife is not a clone. This knife is not a copy. This knife is functionally designed from top to bottom. The milling pattern is a standard milling pattern. It is not copying anybody. The blade is unique. It doesn't look like anybody else's blade. It is a simple user blade. This is not a copy. This is a unique entity. They have other milling patterns, other pivot designs, and other things, and that part will quickly go from your mind. What this is a beautifully engineered, beautifully executed, and just beautiful knife. I just think it's so well done. I'm addicted to it. Even with the other excellent knives in my collection, this is the one that I want to keep reaching for. And that's because of the combination of the right size, the right materials, the right look, the right ergos, and the right action. I'm addicted to this phosphor bronze washer action. It's not as fast as some of the other ones that I showed, but the feel of it, the tactile feel, is something that cannot be explained. It's like using a manual gearbox in your race car as opposed to an automatic transmission in your road car. It just feels just a little bit more connected to the end user, and I really like that. So if I have not gushed enough about this knife, I am a real fan. I like it so much that I'm buying one. I don't know how much more of an endorsement I can give to a knife other than to put my money where my mouth is. I did that for the Koenig Arius. I did that for the JG Custom Scout. And I've done it for numerous other knives. And so take my word for it, guys. This is a maker to watch. It's two guys. I don't even think that I've mentioned some of the most important things. We're 21 minutes into this video and there's still more information to convey. These guys also are making their own materials. They're starting to forge their own Timascus/Mokutai. They've made their own Mokume. These guys have big plans. They have big ideas, and they have all the expertise and the abilities to do it. And so I think we're going to see big things from these guys. And if you haven't already, take a good hard look at Edgar Cole Custom Knives. I'm going to leave a link down below so you guys can click. I'll leave a link to their Instagram page as well. Go ahead and follow them over there. Click like and subscribe to my YouTube channel here if you like what you see. Follow me on Instagram at Dr. Frunkey. And as always, guys, this is Dr. Frunkey saying, take care.